If I wanted to keep an intelligent young person broke for the next 20 years, I would not cut his salary. I would do something much more effective. I would let his paycheck land in one checking account, leave it there, and let convenience, inflation, mood, and delay siphon it away in silence. That is how most people lose. Not in one spectacular collapse, not because they are stupid. They lose because their money enters a pipe with no valves, no pressure control, no direction, and no destination beyond the next urge. You call it normal. I call it an open pipeline to mediocrity. Most people think wealth is about income. I have spent my life watching the opposite. Income matters, of course, but income without a system is just water poured onto sand. It disappears fast, leaves you with nothing solid, and tricks you into believing. The problem is that you need more water. Usually, you do not need more water first. You need a better pipe. That is the first brutal truth. A paycheck is not wealth. A paycheck is raw fuel. It only becomes wealth when you force it through a structure that protects it, multiplies it, and keeps your emotions from touching it every 5 minutes. The average person treats checking like a home. It is not a home. It is a loading dock. That distinction changes everything. A checking account is where money arrives. That is all. It is not where your future should live. It is not where your emergency reserves should sleep. It is not where your long-term capital should wait for you to feel disciplined enough to move it. The longer money sits there, the more people confuse visibility with security. They open the app, see cash, and feel rich. That feeling is one of the most expensive feelings in personal finance, because idle cash in the wrong pipe does not stay idle. It leaks through inflation. It leaks through convenience. It leaks through subscriptions you forgot takeout, you rationalize, clothes you did not need, gadgets you mistook for progress, and little emotional purchases that feel harmless because each one is small leaks sink big futures. If inflation is eating 3 or 4% and your checking account is paying almost nothing, you are not standing still. You are moving backward with your shoes tied together. That is not neutrality. That is a silent loss. And silent losses are dangerous because they do not produce panic. They produce drift. Panic gets your attention. Drift steals your life without raising its voice. So if I were starting over in this era, I would stop treating checking like a reservoir and start treating it like an intake valve, enough to pay rent, enough to cover utilities, enough to handle the credit card bill that should already be planned, enough to prevent unnecessary overdraft chaos, but not enough to tempt me into confusing available cash with investable capital. That is the first control point in the pipeline. I call it the friction cut. You cut the distance between paycheck and purpose. The shorter that distance, the smaller the role of willpower. Now here is where most people make the first serious mistake. They hear the phrase save money and imagine a giant scary mountain. They think they need some heroic lump sum before they can breathe. They imagine 6 figures in cash or some perfect setup that will magically make them feel safe forever. That is nonsense. Safety does not begin when the number becomes impressive. Safety begins when the system becomes real. The first destination in the pipeline is not glamour. It is defense. I want the first meaningful branch of your pipeline feeding a high-yield savings account, not because I worship cash, but because I understand shocks. Life is full of shocks. Cars break. Jobs disappear. Landlords raise rent. Teeth crack. Parents need help. Flights get canceled. A small emergency without reserves is not a small emergency. It is the beginning of debt, panic, and bad decisions. An emergency fund is not about return first. It is about refusal power. When life punches you in the mouth, cash reserves let you refuse a predatory credit card balance, refuse a bad loan, refuse desperation, refuse the humiliating idea that one broken appliance gets to rewrite your entire month. That is what defense capital does. It buys emotional stability at the exact moment emotional instability becomes expensive. Most Americans cannot handle even a modest emergency without debt. That tells you the problem is not intelligence. It tells you the problem is structural fragility. They are living with no pressure tank in the line. So every shock hits the main pipe directly. That is a terrible design. 3 to 6 months of necessary expenses is not a magic commandment handed down from heaven. It is a rational range for building a buffer between your life and chaos. Start with 3. Build towards 6 if your income is less predictable, your family load is heavier, or your industry has a habit of turning stable people into victims overnight. But do not worship the target as if your life starts only after you hit it. The real victory is that the pipeline is now carrying money into defense automatically. If you can automate 10%, start there. If you can automate $5, start there. I have never been impressed by people who wait for the perfect amount. I have always been impressed by people who install the valve, because once the valve is installed, improvement becomes mechanical, and mechanical beats emotional almost every time. That brings me to the second brutal truth. Most people trust willpower because they have not yet built a machine. They keep making monthly promises to themselves. This month I will save more. This month I will spend less. This month I will be disciplined. That is a child negotiating with a furnace. A furnace does not care what you meant to do. Your environment, your habits, your notifications, your stress, your fatigue, your social comparison, your hunger, your insecurity, and your convenience options are all waiting to consume loose cash. So I do not want you depending on motivation. I want your future paid before your moods wake up. That is what automation really is. It is pre-committed self-respect. It is a steel valve you install between your paycheck and your weaknesses. Once defense is built, most people keep overfeeding the cash branch because it feels safe. Safety is comforting, but beyond the reserve you truly need, oversaving and low yield cash becomes another form of fear. That is where offense begins. I want the next branch of the pipeline feeding retirement accounts, not because retirement is an old person's issue, because compounding is a time issue, and time is the one asset no one can refinance. If you are young, you do not have a money advantage yet, you have a duration advantage. That can be worth far more than talent. A person who starts early with modest amounts is often not winning with brilliance. He is winning with runway. He gives compounding more years to do what human effort alone cannot do. People consistently underestimate what time does to discipline capital. They think in straight lines. Wealth does not grow in straight lines. It grows like pressure building in a sealed system. At first, it seems trivial. Then one day the machine feels alive, and people who laughed at small contributions begin asking what your secret was. There usually was no secret. There was just uninterrupted flow. If I were a young worker today, I would look at a Roth IRA as one of the clearest gifts the system will ever hand me, especially if my income still qualifies. You put in money that has already been taxed. Then you let the gains grow inside a shield. The taxman cannot keep nibbling it year after year. That matters. A lot of people hear tax-free growth and think it sounds technical. It is not technical. It is freedom from friction. Friction compounds too. Every tax drag, every fee, every unnecessary turn, every year you delay, every dollar you fail to invest after contributing. Each one slows the wheel. That is why I get almost offended when people fund an account and then leave the money sitting there uninvested. That is like buying fertile land and refusing to plant. The account is not the harvest, the investment is the harvest. That mistake costs people fortunes because it looks responsible on the surface. They tell themselves they opened the account, made the contribution, checked the box, but a container does not produce a crop. Capital must be assigned, it must be working, it must own something. That is a principle much larger than any retirement account. Money that does not own productive assets is not building a future. It is waiting for one. A 401k deserves the same cold practicality. If your employer offers a match and you refuse to capture it, you are walking past free ownership because the paperwork looked annoying. I do not know how to say that gently. That is foolish. A match is one of the rare moments in life when the game openly tilts in your favor. You take it, you do not debate it, you do not postpone it because you want to think about it. Next quarter, a lot of wealth is built that way. Not through genius, through refusing to leave obvious money on the table. Now, if your work situation is different, if you are self-employed or building something on your own, the exact account structure changes, but the principle does not. You still want tax-advantaged pipes feeding long-duration ownership. The details matter, the principle matters more. Defense first, then shielded compounding. And after that, the third branch matters more than most people realize. That is the regular taxable brokerage account. This is where many people become confused because there is no special magic label on it, no elegant tax story like the Roth, no employer match like the 401k. It feels plain. Plain is often good. Plain is where serious wealth gets heavy. Once emergency reserves are built and the tax advantage pipes are being fed, taxable investing becomes the overflow line into broader ownership. This is where your surplus income begins to behave like hired labor. Every dollar you send there is another worker you put on your payroll. That is how I think about invested capital. not as money I spent, as workers I hired. The reason I prefer broad productive assets for most people is simple. Most people do not need more excitement. They need more ownership. They do not need to prove they are brilliant stock pickers. They need to participate in the compounding output of strong businesses over long periods with minimal self-inflicted damage low. Cost index funds solve a bigger psychological problem than people admit. They reduce the temptation to turn investing into ego theater. And ego theater is one of the most expensive hobbies in the market. Now, if someone wants a small sandbox for higher risk ideas, fine. But I want the core of the pipeline boring, consistent, and hard to sabotage. Boring is underrated because boring compounds. Excitement usually extracts fees, taxes, mistakes, and stress. If you want freedom, do not build your financial life around stimulation. Build it around flow. One of the ugliest habits I see is people refusing to buy productive assets when prices fall. Even after they claim to be long-term investors, they love the market when it is expensive because high prices feel like confirmation. They hate the market when it is cheaper because fear feels like wisdom. That is backwards. If you are a net buyer of assets, downturns are not purely bad news. They are unpleasant discounts. I am not asking you to celebrate crashes as if pain elsewhere does not matter. I am asking you to stop acting shocked that the ownership machine occasionally goes on sale. The people who build real wealth over decades are usually not the people who avoided every drawdown. They are the people who kept feeding the pipeline when headlines were screaming. That is a different temperament. It is also why automation matters so much, because a well-built pipeline keeps buying when your emotions would otherwise shut the valve. That is what rich people understand that average earners often miss. Rich people are not always smarter. They are often simply less exposed to their own impulses because the system moves first. That line is worth sitting with. The wealthy do not rely on remembering. They do not rely on the version of themselves who had a tough day. They do not rely on the mood after a bad week, a breakup, a layoff scare, a social media spiral, or a dinner with friends who made consumption feel like achievement. They route around those weaknesses. That is why systems beat intentions. And this leads to a third brutal truth. A high savings rate does more than increase net worth. It changes your behavior because it changes your constraints. If 50% of every dollar disappears into defense and ownership before you can decorate your identity with it, you are forced to confront reality. You must learn to live on less. Negotiate better, earn better, think harder, and stop treating every desire like an emergency. This is why aggressive automation often looks extreme to the people around you. They think you are depriving yourself. Sometimes you are simply removing waste and revealing how much of modern consumption was anesthesia, not joy. When you automate a serious percentage off the top, your money leaves your checking account like rent, non-negotiable. That single move can accomplish what years of motivational videos will never do. It turns saving and investing from a moral struggle into a default operating condition. That is a much more stable way to live. And yes, in the early phase, it can feel tight. Good tightness teaches. Tightness shows you which expenses were support beams and which were costume jewelry. It shows you whether your apartment is a home or a vanity project. It shows you whether your car is transportation or a monthly tribute to other people's opinions. It shows you whether your spending is aligned with your values or merely with your fatigue. A lot of people do not need a higher salary first. They need the courage to audit the life their salary is funding. Now let me say something uncomfortable. A person earning $50,000 or $60,000 with a serious system can be building more durable wealth than a person earning $200,000. With no pipeline, no reserve discipline, no investing habit, and no control over lifestyle inflation. I have seen that movie many times. High income with no valves becomes high-speed leakage. Lower income with a strong pipeline becomes slow but undeniable accumulation. This is why I care so much about order. Order is everything. You do not pour endless water into a broken system and hope abundance solves design failure. You redesign the flow. First, know what comes in and what goes out. Not because budgeting is glamorous, because diagnosis comes before repair. A lot of people refuse to look directly at their own numbers because the truth embarrasses them, but numbers do not become kinder when ignored. You need to know the inflow, the outflow, the surplus if it exists, or the deficit if it does not. Shame is useless here. Clarity is useful. Then build the emergency reserve target from actual monthly necessities, not fantasy spending and not social media spending. Multiply necessary monthly expenses by 3. Push to 6 if your reality deserves it. Open the right savings vehicle and automate contributions into it. Then when the reserve is complete, do not keep pampering that account out of fear. Redirect the flow. That matters. A completed defense bucket should become a completed valve, not an excuse to stop the machine. After that, fund the shielded compounding pipes, capture the 401k match, use the Roth if eligible. Max what you can, not because maxing out makes you virtuous, but because every year you miss is a year of sheltered compounding you do not get back. And if the full max is too large, then divide it monthly and make it real. Grand ambitions without monthly mechanics are just fantasies wearing spreadsheets. Then send the remaining surplus to taxable ownership. Notice the sequence, not random, not emotional, not whatever sounds interesting this month. Sequence creates force. A river with direction can carve stone. A flood without direction just makes a mess. Now let me address the psychological trap that ruins this process for a lot of young people. They think because retirement feels far away, it must matter less. This is one of the dumbest tricks the human brain plays on itself. The distant thing often matters more precisely because it has the most time to compound. At 18, 24, 28, even 35, the amounts can look almost insulting. $100 here, a few hundred there. It feels too small to matter. That is because people compare early contributions to late outcomes and conclude the inputs are weak. But the early dollars are not small in function. They are senior workers. They have more years on the job. A dollar invested young is not the same animal as a dollar invested late. It has more seasons to grow, more cycles to reinvest, more crashes to buy through, more time for the tax shield to matter, more time for your own labor to keep feeding it. So when I tell people to automate early, I am not giving them a cute habit. I am telling them to stop firing the oldest workers in their future company. This is also why I dislike financial advice that stays trapped at the level of frugality theater. Skip coffee, use coupons, cut this, trim that, survive on optimization. Tricks. Fine, small leaks matter. But if that is all you ever talk about, you miss the point. The real game is not only reduction, it is conversion. You are converting income into stability, then converting stability into investable surplus, then converting surplus into ownership, then allowing ownership to buy time and time to buy freedom. That is the pipeline. That is the machine behind the machine. At some point, if you build this properly, something subtle happens. Money stress begins to lose its dictatorship over your mind. Not because you have no problems, because you no longer feel one surprise away from humiliation. That peace of mind is deeply misunderstood. People think it comes from spending more. It usually comes from having stronger structure. A person with no reserves, no automation, no investing habit, and a checking account full of temptations can make a lot of money and still feel hunted. A person with a modest but disciplined system can feel calmer because his pipeline is doing work even when he is sleeping. I value that heavily. You should too. There is another side effect people overlook. A serious savings and investing system often forces creativity. If you automate first and live on what remains, you stop asking only how to cut. You begin asking how to earn better, negotiate better, sell better, learn better, and become more valuable. Constraint often produces invention. The person who knows half the paycheck is already spoken for starts behaving differently. He gets serious faster. That seriousness compounds in areas far beyond money. You become harder to fool, harder to pressure, harder to trap. When you are building assets every month, you are less likely to tolerate nonsense from employers, less likely to impress yourself with consumer theater, less likely to believe that your salary is your identity, and less likely to stay dependent on systems that do not respect you. That is why I do not think of saving as deprivation. I think of it as a transfer of allegiance. You stop serving the present version of yourself who wants relief. You start serving the future version who wants control. That transfer is the foundation of dignity. Let me make this even plainer. If your money arrives and stays where your hand can reach it, your emotions will govern it. If your money arrives and immediately moves through a defined path into defense, tax shelters, and productive ownership, your future will govern it. Everything else is decoration. I have no issue with enjoying life. I have a great issue with building a life that requires permanent financial self, betrayal just to appear normal. Most people buy too much image, too little runway, too much convenience, too little buffer, too much lifestyle, too little ownership. Too much consumption, too little control, then they wonder why income feels like a treadmill. A treadmill is exactly what it is when the pipeline is wrong. You are generating effort without directional transfer. That is exhausting. The cure is not hype. The cure is plumbing, better plumbing. And better plumbing begins with one harsh acceptance. Your paycheck is not evidence that you are winning. It is evidence that another round of fuel has arrived. What matters is where it goes before you have time to perform yourself with it. So here is the simple sequence I would want almost any young worker to understand. Use checking as the intake dock, not the residence. Keep enough there to handle known obligations and avoid stupid penalties, but do not build your future in the most accessible place. Build the defense tank in a high-yield account and automate toward 3 to 6 months of true expenses, not aspirational expenses, not inflated lifestyle expenses, real survival expenses. When the defense target is built, redirect the flow. Do not let comfort turn into cash hoarding. Feed retirement accounts with intention, capture the employer match, use the Roth if eligible, and after you contribute, actually invest the money. Do not mistake the account for the asset. Then build taxable ownership with consistency. Broad, productive, mostly boring ownership is a fine way for most people to become wealthy. Let the market's long-term engine work for you instead of trying to out-dramatize it. Finally, automate the whole thing so your best financial decisions are made before appetite enters the room. That is the sequence. It is not sexy. It is much better than sexy. It works. And the reason it works is that it removes most of the moments where you would otherwise sabotage yourself. Now, I know what a lot of people think when they hear this. I do not make enough. I will start when I earn more. I need to get organized first. I need to wait until life calms down. I need to learn more before I open the account. I need to be certain before I automate. That is, fear dressed as prudence. You do not need a finished life to build a working pipeline. You need a first valve. $10 automated teaches the same identity as 100. 100 teaches the same identity as 1,000. The size matters later. The installation matters first. The habit of transfer is what changes your future. Because once capital starts moving by rule instead of mood, everything else becomes easier to improve. You can raise the percentages later. You can optimize account choices later. You can refine investments later. But if you keep postponing the system until you feel ready, you will stay in the same expensive loop most people never escape. Park the money where temptation can smell it. Spend to relieve stress. Promise to do better. Repeat. That loop is not bad luck, it is bad design. And bad design has a cost not only in dollars, in attention, in peace, in confidence, in freedom, in the ability to say no, in the ability to take risks when real opportunities appear, in the ability to hold your ground when everyone else is panicking. That last point matters more than you think. A person with no reserve and no system cannot think clearly in a downturn. He is too exposed, he is too needy, he sells when he should wait, borrows when he should refuse, and chases income when he should be buying assets. The person with reserves, automation, and a long pipeline behaves differently. He is not invincible. He is just less cornered. That is often enough. Most financial disasters are not caused by a lack of information. They are caused by being cornered. So if you want a phrase to remember, remember this. A checking account is for arrival. A savings reserve is for survival. Retirement accounts are for sheltered compounding. Taxable investing is for expanding ownership. Automation is the gatekeeper that makes the whole system real. That is the pipeline. Build that and your money stops behaving like a visitor and starts behaving like an employee. Ignore that. And you can spend years earning more while feeling no richer, no safer, and no freer. I have watched the world worship income and ignore architecture. Architecture wins always. So the test is very simple. When your next paycheck lands, will it sit there like every other month, waiting for inflation, appetite, and convenience to carve it up? Or will you force it into a pipeline that serves your future before it serves your impulses? That is the door. On one side is the same old loop, the same old excuses, the same old feeling that more income will someday rescue bad structure. On the other side is a system that begins small, looks almost boring, and then quietly changes the trajectory of your life. Most people will keep the cash in sight and call that control. I would rather move the cash out of reach and call that freedom. Choose your pipeline, because the future you keep talking about will be built by valves, not wishes.